I've never tried this myself, but I would imagine if you were driving down the road, you saw someone jogging, you rolled your window down, and you shouted out your window to them, "Hey, who's winning?" You'd probably get some pretty strange looks. And maybe if you found someone who was interested enough to explain the whole situation to you, they might say, "Listen, I'm jogging, I'm not competing, I'm not racing against anyone." But I want you to understand that even in a jog, we're in a race. No, we may not be racing another person, but we're racing against ourselves. Hopefully we're trying to do better in terms of time or maybe better in terms of distance. And it's not until we push ourselves that we'll go further ourselves. And I want you to know today that really life is completely that way. Life has been likened in the Bible unto a race. We're all racing against the potential that God's put into our lives, and we're racing by way of the abilities God has given us and against the opportunities that God has given us. Now, no two of us have the same abilities or opportunities. That's unique to each of us. But it is imperative for you to understand that you do have abilities from God. You've been blessed, and you have opportunities that God has uniquely placed before you. And each of us are to run our lives for His glory and by His strength in a way that would honor Him and be a great blessing to others. In Hebrews chapter 12, we find this analogy really clearly painted for us. I want to read a couple verses for you there. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. The Bible says, "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God." I believe this passage reveals to us three places to which we must look, three people to whom we must look if we want to make the most of the race of our lives. The first area I find in this passage is that we need to look to those who've already run the race of life and they've done well. This chapter I read from today is Hebrews chapter 12. But if we were to go back just one chapter to Hebrews chapter 11, we would find that that's the chapter in the Bible we often call the chapter of faith or the hall of faith. It's the place where we find stories of those who had a great confidence in God, and for that reason, they went great places for God. And the reality is, as we study the lives from this great cloud of witnesses, we can be encouraged in our own lives. I had someone tell me one time, I don't read the Old Testament because we're living in the New Testament time. And that was a very unfortunate and unwise statement. You see, the Apostle Paul wrote for us this in the New Testament. In Romans 15 and verse 4, he said, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime," speaking of the Old Testament, "were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope." If we want to make as much progress for God as possible, it'll be really, really helpful to learn from the lives of those who've run their race well. We can glean inspiration as well as information from them. Here's a second element that affects the way we look in life. We need to look within. We need to look at our own lives. Now, I want to be clear here. I am not talking about a morbid introspection. I have found that the more I look within, the more discouraged I can become. And so I'm not talking about just that empty, vain, morbid introspection where we're just looking within. You see, the reality is we frequently do not have the answers. And the fact is, the majority of the time, we're not even certain of which questions to ask, much less the fact we don't have the answers. What I'm talking about here is a personal assessment of our own lives with the help of God, similar to the spirit of David as he asked for the Lord to search him. It's this heart that says, "God, would you help me to see my life as it really is so that I can remove the things that may be prohibiting me in the race of my life?" Now, back in our text, the Bible said it this way, "Lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us." Now, this helps us to understand there are things that can hold us back in our lives. The Bible speaks here of weights and sin. And when we take these words on the heels of that great chapter 11, the chapter before where I started reading today, we come to understand that really these sins and weights that come into our lives are all of a result of whether or not we're choosing to live by faith. You see, when we're fully confident in God, we're going to trust Him and we're going to obey Him. And so we've got to continuously be saying, Lord, would you help me to see my life as you see it, to remove the sin, the weight that may be prohibiting me from moving forward. Now, I've watched baseball players getting ready to go up to a time at bat, and they'll oftentimes take their bat and they'll drop a weight on it, and they'll take some swings with that weighted bat. And that kind of loosens them up. It makes them focus on their mechanics. But you know, when they go finally to the plate, they're not taking that weight with them. They want their bat speed to be as high as it can possibly be. And friends, we need to have that same heart in life that says, you know, if there's any weight or sin in my life that's going to prohibit me from being at my best for the Lord, I want to remove that. I want to get rid of that. Let me ask you today, does your life look different today than it did 1 year ago? That's something we should all be thinking from time to time. Are you looking more like Jesus as you move forward in your lives? Writing to the church in Corinth, the Apostle Paul had this to say. He said, you know, when I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. You know, there's nothing wrong with acting like a child if you're a child. But in time, things should change. And as we mature in our spiritual lives, we're going to find that things that maybe weren't a bother to us years ago, as we've matured, we've come to the point where we say, you know, I see this now as unnecessary or even wrong. I want to remove it from my life so that I can be at my best for the Lord. And I saved the best thought for last today. Yes, it's helpful to look to those who've run the race of their lives and done well. It's important for us to look within to see what may be prohibiting us. But the most important is we need to look to Jesus. We need to look to Jesus. He sets the bar when it comes to making the most of life. And the text told us this, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. In other words, it all begins and it ends with Him. We're to look to Jesus. In the very next verse here in Hebrews chapter 12, we read these words, consider Him. That word consider in the language of the New Testament means to analyze closely. And when you closely look at Jesus, you're going to find not only did no one do more with their lives than He did, but He really is the example when it comes to how to make the most of our lives. He shares with us how it should be done. But not only is He our exemplar, He is our divine enabler. He gives to us what we need so that we can make the most of the life He's given us. You see, that's why the Apostle Paul could write these words in Philippians 4. He said, I can do all things. And it would have been vain and empty if he would have stopped there. But he concluded by saying, through Christ, which strengtheneth me. He said, Jesus is my example, and He's my divine enabler, the enablement along the way in my life. Years ago, I was watching a Monday night football game. It was between the Chicago Bears and the New York Giants. And I love football. Neither one of those teams are my teams. But that night, playing for the Bears was a running back who I admired greatly, Walter Payton. And he was setting records and near the end of his career. And at one point in that game, he made a rush and the announcer said something to the effect of this. Walter Payton just crossed the 9-mile mark in rushing yards for his career. Just imagine that. The field's 100 yards long. And in the course of his professional career, he had rushed, as of that game, more than 9 miles. An incredible statement. But it was even more incredible what was stated next. For the next announcer said this, yeah, and he did that after getting knocked down every 4.6 yards. You know, Walter Payton learned something in life. If I'm going to move forward, I'm going to have to learn how to get up and just keep going and persevering and pressing on. He said, I'm going to make the most of this career that I have. I wonder what would happen if we had a heart that said, I want to make the most of this life that God has given. I want to just keep forging ahead in this race that God has for me. Now, I don't have to ask you today if you're in the race. You are. But I think it's fair for all of us to ask, I wonder how are we doing in the midst of this race? This might be a good time to say, you know, I want to get in the Word and think of those who've run the race before me. And from that cloud of witnesses, I want to learn some things that can help me in my life, be inspired as well as informed. Today might be a great day to look within and say, Lord, would you help me to see some things in my life that may be weighting me down? Maybe they're sinful things. Help me clear those away. And this day, as well as every single day, is a great opportunity to look to Jesus and say, Lord, thank you for being my Savior. And thank you for setting an example for me. And Lord, would you enable me by your power to live a life that's glorifying for you and good for others.